4 men, surrounded, outnumbered, and in the next 10 minutes, 3 of them would be dead, while the 4th crawled 7 miles through enemy territory with a shattered body, praying someone would still believe he was alive. This is the story of the only man who walked out of that mountain. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how a routine reconnaissance mission in the mountains of Afghanistan turned into one of the deadliest single days in Navy SEAL history, and how one man's will to survive became a story of loyalty, sacrifice, and the true meaning of brotherhood under fire. Early 2005. The parts the Sonos continued to proceed for years, but in the mountains of Kunar province, something was stirring that most of the world would never hear about. Intelligence had picked up chatter. A high-value Taliban commander, a man responsible for ambushes that had already killed American troops, was believed to be hiding somewhere in the Hindu Kush. His name was Ahmad Shah, and the plan to find him would become one of the most scrutinized missions in modern SEAL history. The Navy turned to SDV Team 1, Alpha Platoon. These weren't ordinary soldiers. Every man had spent years earning the right to wear that trident, training that breaks most people before they ever see combat. But this mission didn't need an army. It needed 4 men who could move like ghosts, gather intelligence, and disappear before anyone knew they were there. Lieutenant Markle Murphy, Sonar Technician 2nd Class Matthew Axelson, Gunner's Mate 2nd Class Danny Dietz, and Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Marcus Luttrell. 4 names that in a few days would be etched into military history forever. Think about that for a second. 4 men dropped into terrain that rises 10,000 feet into the sky, surrounded by ridgelines and ravines where a single misstep could mean a broken leg or worse. No backup close by, no easy way out. Just 4 SEALs, their rifles, and a radio that would soon become the only thread connecting them to the outside world. On June 27th, the team staged out of Bagram Air Base, running through the plan one final time. Reconnaissance and surveillance, get eyes on the target, report back. Simple on paper, but paper doesn't account for goat herders wandering into your hiding spot. Paper doesn't account for a decision that would haunt one survivor for the rest of his life. Because the next morning, when that helicopter dropped them into the mountains under cover of darkness, none of them knew they were walking into what would become known as the deadliest day in Naval Special Warfare history. They just knew the mission had begun, and there was no turning back now. June 28th, before dawn. The insertion went smoothly, a quiet drop into the Hindu Kush, the kind of textbook operation these 4 men had trained years to execute. They moved into position on a ridgeline overlooking the suspected location of Ahmad Shah's forces, dug into cover, and settled in to watch and wait. For hours, everything held together. Then came the sound no reconnaissance team ever wants to hear. Footsteps, voices, bells, goats. An Afghan man and 2 boys, herding livestock through the mountains, wandered directly into the SEALs' hidden position. In an instant, 4 of the most highly trained warriors on the planet were staring down 3 unarmed civilians, and the civilians were staring right back. Think about the weight of that moment. These weren't enemy combatants. They were farmers. Boys, really, just tending animals in the only home they'd ever known. But if they walked away and reported what they'd seen, the entire team could be compromised, hunted by dozens, maybe hundreds, of armed fighters in terrain that offered nowhere to run. So the 4 SEALs did something that would later be debated by historians, filmmakers, and veterans for years to come. They held a vote. Kill the herders to protect the mission, or let them go and trust in the rules of engagement. in basic human decency, in the hope that mercy wouldn't cost them everything. They chose mercy. The goat herders were released, unharmed. It's easy to judge that decision from a screen years later, safe and far from that mountain. But put yourself in their boots for just a second. 4 men, thousands of miles from home, forced to choose between their own survival and the lives of strangers who'd done nothing wrong. They chose the harder path, the human one, and it wouldn't take long to find out what that choice would cost them. Because within an hour, the mountain around them began to move. Word was already spreading, and somewhere below, armed men were picking up their weapons. It didn't take long. Less than an hour after the goat herders disappeared back down the mountain, the SEALs felt it before they saw it. That specific electric stillness that soldiers learn to recognize. The kind of quiet that comes right before everything goes wrong. Then the mountain exploded with gunfire. Anti-coalition fighters, somewhere between 30 and 40 of them, maybe more, came pouring down from higher ground, using the terrain itself as a weapon. The SEALs were pinned on a slope with almost no cover, rock and dirt kicking up around them as rounds cracked past their heads. Here's what most people don't realize about mountain combat. It's not like the movies. There's no clean line between you and the enemy. Fighters were above them, below them, on both flanks, a horseshoe of gunfire with the SEALs caught in the middle of it. Every direction was danger. Every choice was a gamble. Dietz was hit almost immediately, taking rounds to his hand and torso, but he stayed in the fight, returning fire even as blood soaked through his gear. Axelson fought with the kind of discipline only years of training could produce, controlling his breathing, controlling his shots, even as the world around him tore itself apart. Murphy and Luttrell laid down suppressive fire, trying to buy their teammates even a few seconds of relief. But the fighters kept coming, and the terrain worked against the SEALs at every turn. Steep slopes meant there was nowhere to retreat to without exposing themselves completely. At one point, the only option left was almost unthinkable. They leapt from a cliff face, tumbling and rolling down the mountainside just to break contact for a few precious seconds, absorbing the impact of rock and earth because it was better than absorbing a bullet. 2 hours. That's how long this firefight raged, an eternity when every second could be your last. And as the battle wore on, it became brutally clear. They were losing ground, they were losing blood, and soon they'd be losing something the entire team couldn't survive without: contact with the outside world. By this point in the fight, the situation had gone from desperate to catastrophic. Dietz was severely wounded. The team's radio signal was weak, swallowed by the mountains surrounding them. And without contact to the outside world, there would be no rescue, no air support, no hope of reinforcements reaching them in time. Lieutenant Michael Murphy understood this faster than anyone. The signal was blocked by terrain. The only way to get a clear transmission out was to move into open ground, exposed ground, the kind of terrain that, in the middle of an active firefight, was essentially a kill zone. Murphy made the decision anyway. He stood up. He walked out into open terrain, in full view of the fighters on the ridgeline, and dialed his cell phone to call it in. His official Medal of Honor citation would later describe it simply: that he fought his way into open terrain to gain a better position to transmit a call for help. Think about what that actually means. Every instinct, every hour of training tells a soldier to seek cover under fire. Murphy did the opposite. He made himself a target on purpose because he knew it was the only way his men had a chance. As he spoke into the phone, requesting immediate support for his team, enemy rounds found him. He was shot in the torso, and according to those who later reconstructed the events, He continued the call anyway, finishing the transmission, even as he bled from the wound, even as the fighters kept firing. "Roger that, sir. Thank you." Those were reportedly among his final radioed words, acknowledging that help was finally on the way. Murphy's call worked. Somewhere, back at base, the message landed. A quick reaction force was already scrambling to respond. But Murphy wouldn't survive to see them arrive. He continued fighting after the call, giving everything he had left, until his wounds finally overtook him. He would later receive the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest award for valor. But in that moment, on that mountain, he was just a man who chose his team over himself. And the help he called for was already in the air, help that was about to fly straight into a nightmare of its own. Murphy's call had gone through. Back at base, a quick reaction force scrambled into action almost immediately. An MH-47 Chinook helicopter, loaded with more SEALs and Army Night Stalker aviators, launched into the mountains to pull the pinned-down team out. Every second mattered now. Every man on that helicopter knew exactly what they were flying into. They just didn't know how bad it already was. As the Chinook approached the battle area, it was flying into a war zone that had no secure landing site, no clear picture of enemy positions, and dozens of armed fighters still scattered across the ridgelines below. The helicopter began its final approach. That's when the rocket-propelled grenade hit. The explosion tore through the aircraft's fragile mechanics, and the Chinook lost control almost instantly, spiraling before slamming into the unforgiving mountainside. 16 men were killed in an instant, 8 Army Night Stalkers and 8 Navy SEALs, gone in the time it takes to blink. Turbine 3-3 has just been shot down. That radio transmission, reportedly relayed in the chaos that followed, would become one of the most haunting lines of the entire operation. In a single moment, the mission to rescue 4 men had become the deadliest single incident in the history of naval special warfare. 16 more families would receive the knock on the door that every military family dreads. 16 more names would eventually be etched into memorials, alongside men they'd never even met, in a battle that had started with 4 SEALs and a herd of goats. And still, on the mountain below, the original firefight raged on. Murphy was gone. Dietz, badly wounded, kept fighting. Axelson kept fighting. And Marcus Luttrell, the 4th man, was still alive, still moving, still holding on to whatever strength he had left. But the mountain wasn't finished with them yet, because in the chaos following the helicopter crash, the fight for the last 2 SEALs on the ground was about to reach its breaking point. With Murphy gone and the Chinook down, the battle on the ridge had become something almost impossible to imagine. 3 exhausted, wounded SEALs, cut off from any hope of immediate rescue, still fighting for their lives against overwhelming numbers. Dietz had already taken multiple rounds, but he refused to stop firing. Then it happened. Dietz was hit again, this time fatally. Axelson, fighting beside him, took rounds to his own body as the assault continued, but somehow, impossibly, he kept moving, kept returning fire, driven by something deeper than physical strength. Think about what that kind of will actually looks like. Not the movie version, the real version. A body running on adrenaline and instinct alone, every nerve screaming to stop, and a mind that simply refuses. But even that will has its limits. Axelson was struck by a fatal round shortly after, falling not far from where Dietz lay. In the span of a single afternoon, 3 of the 4 men who had been dropped into these mountains that morning were now gone. In that left one, Marcus Luttrell, wounded, alone, his teammates dead around him, and the fighters who'd killed them still very much alive and still hunting. He'd later describe watching his friends fall, one by one, with nothing he could do to stop it. The weight of surviving something like that, of being the one left standing when everyone beside you is gone, is a wound all its own, one that doesn't show up on any medical chart. But Luttrell didn't have the luxury of grief. Not yet. Badly injured, disoriented, and completely alone in hostile territory, he had one option left: move, survive, find a way off this mountain, even if it meant crawling every inch of the way. And that's exactly what he was about to do. What followed would become one of the most extraordinary survival stories in modern military history. 7 miles of unforgiving terrain, a body pushed past its breaking point, and a decision by strangers that would ultimately save his life. What Marcus Luttrell did next is the part of this story that sounds almost too extraordinary to be true. Multiple fractures, shrapnel wounds, a body running on fumes, and somehow he moved, crawling, stumbling, dragging himself across brutal mountain terrain, trying to put distance between himself and the fighters still searching the ridgelines for him. The exact distance he covered has been debated by historians ever since. Some accounts describe roughly 7 miles, though the precise number remains disputed, drawn largely from Luttrell's own memory of those days. What isn't disputed is the condition he was in: dehydrated, bleeding, alone in enemy territory with no working radio, and no way to know if anyone even knew he was still alive. Think about that kind of isolation for a moment. Not just physical pain, though there was plenty of that, but the psychological weight of believing, quite possibly, that the entire world thought you were already dead. Eventually, exhausted beyond what any body should endure, Luttrell was found, not by American forces, but by local villagers from a nearby settlement. And what happened next reveals something about human nature that this story doesn't get enough credit for. The villagers took him in under Pashtunwali, an ancient Pashtun code of honor that obligates hospitality and protection to those in need, even at extraordinary personal risk. Sheltering an American serviceman while Taliban-aligned fighters hunted him nearby wasn't a small favor. It was a decision that could have gotten every person in that village killed. They made it anyway. Some details of exactly how those days unfolded remain difficult to verify with full certainty. Accounts vary, memories blur under trauma, and much of what we know comes from Luttrell himself. But the core of it holds. Strangers, bound by a code older than the war itself, chose to protect a wounded enemy soldier because their own values demanded. Word eventually reached American forces that Luttrell might still be alive. And after days of uncertainty, of grief already settling over families who believed the worst, a rescue operation began forming. The only question left was whether it would arrive in time. July 2nd, 2005, American forces finally reached Marcus Luttrell, alive. Barely, but alive. For days back home, families had been living in the worst kind of limbo, the kind where no news isn't good news. It's just unbearable waiting. 19 American service members were already confirmed dead, 3 SEALs on the ground, 16 more in the helicopter shootdown. It remains one of the deadliest single days in the history of Naval Special Warfare. When word came that Luttrell had survived, it didn't erase the loss. Nothing could. But it gave the story something that pure tragedy alone never does. Proof that even in the worst-case scenario, courage and human decency can still carry someone through. Luttrell was awarded the Navy Cross for his actions on that mountain. Murphy received the Medal of Honor, one of only a handful ever awarded for actions in Afghanistan. Dietz and Axelson were each awarded the Navy Cross as well, recognition of sacrifices that no medal could ever fully repay. It's worth pausing here for a moment on what this story really is. Not an action movie, not a clean narrative of good versus evil. It's the story of four men who chose mercy over self-preservation when they let those goat herders go, and paid an almost unimaginable price for that choice. It's the story of a lieutenant who walked into gunfire because his men needed him to. It's the story of strangers, bound by nothing but an ancient code of honor, who risked everything to save a man they'd never met. Operation Red Wings has been picked apart by historians, filmmakers, and armchair strategists for years. Some details remain disputed. Some numbers vary depending on the source. But what happened on that mountain, the loyalty, the loss, and the will to survive against every possible odd, that part isn't in question at all. Marcus Luttrell carried the weight of that mountain for the rest of his life. Not just the physical scars, but the memory of being the one who walked away when three of his brothers didn't. That's a burden most of us will never have to understand. If this story moved you, there's another one waiting that deserves to be told with the same respect. The story of a Finnish marksman who vanished into the snow and became the deadliest sniper in the history of warfare, hunted by an entire army and never caught. That's Simo Heihe, the ghost of the Winter War, coming up next right here on Valor Untold Stories. If stories like this matter to you, hit subscribe so you never miss the ones still waiting to be told.